A very warm welcome to everyone tuning in today. Welcome to episode number 170 of Navigating Now. My name is Tavishi Gupta, and I'm a director here at Thoughtium, and I will be your host for today's episode. We go live every Thursday at 3 p.m. Central, and you can catch all our episodes at thoughtium.com/live. We are extremely excited to welcome our guest for today, Tavishi Gupta. She is an ex Microsoft PM and a software engineer who's building her second startup, this time in the travel planning space, and it is called Tern, which is an AI travel planning tool that is making travel planning easy and is also a marketplace that connects travelers to modern travel agents. We will be diving into her journey from big tech to serial entrepreneurship, and I'll also explore how Tavishi navigates ambiguity, leads with agility, and is building a team in this new AI realm. Tavishi also happens to be my sister who inspires me to do better and be better every day. So, welcome, Tavi.
Hey, Ashani.
How are you doing?
I'm doing well, really well. Excited to be here.
Really excited to have you here as well. Of course, it's a very special conversation for me personally, having you on the show today. And, we like to ask most of our guests this, and I'm going to ask you this as well. What's one word that describes how you're coming in today?
Um, that's a good question. I guess optimistic.
That's great. Oh,
Very optimistic.
where's that optimism coming from?
I think one of the big things in working in a startup is the constant highs and lows. And if you don't keep your word as optimistic, it's bound to be something not great. So it's best to come in optimistic, and then everything should pan out.
Uh, d- and I'm sure you're hopeful that that's going to be your word for 2024 as well, right? Like just
Exactly.
keeping that optimism high. Tavi, very excited to have you here on the show today, and really looking forward to unpacking your journey and how you're building, your team in this travel AI space. And to kick things off, for our audience as well, share a bit about your journey. From your transition and your life from you're very young, I know that, but yet this transition from the corporate space to being a serial entrepreneur and especially building this AI travel planning space. What's got you here? What's been that story?
Yeah, so I guess there are a lot of pieces to it. Back in college, in my second year, I was heavily into research, and we started kind of building this hardware that was preventative for armed armed shooters in schools. So it was a very high value, high purpose project. That didn't pan out, but that was actually the first time I got into startups. I came to the Valley, I was talking to startups, Y Combinator, Product Hunt, really getting into the mix of things. So because of that inspiration, I think over the years, I was always about research or startups. And I ended up working at Stanford, doing some research, but then going to Microsoft after school. So it was all kind of all over the place. I didn't really know what to do, but that's how I ended up in big tech. It was a safe option, financially, I could build myself to embark on a startup journey if I wanted to do that at any point. And of course, the skill sets that you build in that. So at Microsoft, I was a product manager first, worked with autonomous driving platforms and all the driving stuff. As you know, I don't have my license, so I was the best
I
person
know.
for the job. And then I moved into healthcare as a software engineer. But as I was doing that, I actually started my first company. Some friends had already begun on this journey in the audio tech space, and I ended up helping out and eventually becoming a co-founder. And that really gave me my first big insight into the startup world. We went through an accelerator, raised $1 million, had our first, paying customers. And I think that's kind of the biggest reason I realized I loved wearing all these different hats. And as much as I loved Microsoft and how much it was teaching me, I could only wear one hat. I wore it well, but I could only wear one hat. So because of that, the first startup, I learned a lot. Microsoft was happening. But during the pandemic, I ended up slow traveling for 3 years. I lived across 15 cities, got really deep into the travel planning problem, but also learned a lot from these nomads who are looking for jobs and remote jobs, and they don't have access to anything, no way to really monetize their skills. And that's really what brought me to Tern. So a little over a year ago, quit Microsoft full time and embarked on this journey full time.
Well, I of course know this, and I will say, it's quite the journey from autonomous vehicles to, music tech to travel tech. They're quite like diverse industries altogether. And with, just kind of navigating these very diverse industries, especially in the startup space, there's a lot of ambiguity, right?
Hmm.
And I know personally you've had to navigate a lot of ambiguity, not just by virtue of venturing into the startup space, but also as a young female immigrant founder in this space. Uh,
Yep.
what's that been like?
The one word is frustrating, but I think every female entrepreneur will say that to you. And I think the good thing, though, is we have this now entire group of women that support each other, and
Mm,
minorities that are supporting each other. So now we're slowly building a space and environment where we also have room to get capital, get those privileges that a lot of our counterparts come in with. But it's definitely been an uphill battle. My first company was with two male co-founders, and this company I started on my own. So I've been noticing very stark differences in how VC looks at you, how doors open up, when they open up, and there are all these nuances that we don't really talk about when we talk about these issues. So it's definitely been an uphill battle, but I think for anyone, if on this call is trying to embark on this journey, it's really about knowing what you're passionate about and why you're building it, because your why should every day bring you back, even regardless of the
true.
hardships. And if it can't bring you back, rethink what your why actually is to actually do something that'll bring you back.
That is such a powerful statement because Tavi, you know this, part of the work we do here, and I personally, engage in here at Thoughtium, is really helping organizations think of what's your why? Why do you exist
Hmm.
and why do you do the work you do every day? And, where are you headed? What's your North Star? So it's very powerful to know that even as someone who's, an early stage startup, that's still a focus for you. And that's in fact something that grounds you. Because one of the things I was about to also ask you is, given just this ambiguity and agreed, the uphill battle that you mentioned, what are just some personal practices, things you've adapted that help you remain grounded? I do hear the why is a very big one. Why are you doing what you're
Yeah.
doing? Because I know you and I chat almost every month, and we have this discussion where you'll have this thing, why am I doing this? And then you have your reasons, and you're like,
Yeah.
yes, I know why I'm doing this. But have there been any other maybe tactical things you've done to remain grounded?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of them. I mean, I think you know more than anyone, I'm a very emotional person. And as much as that's really good with empathy and working with, my colleagues, it can sometimes really, like, any of the highs and lows can really impact me
Yeah.
emotionally. So my biggest, work has been around emotional modulation and how do I
Mm,
kind of build that, outline that out. So that, I actually have in 2024, I've started this practice where I have a daily Google form that I basically fill out with, did I do breathing? Did I journal? And the core reason for that is, usually when we're trying to build habits, we go with, did I do it or not? And the day you don't do it, if you don't do it for 2 days, you
mm,
can just get disheartened and be like, oh my God, I lost track. And that sets you apart. And that almost makes you fail in that habit.
yeah.
But one thing I recently realized is you really want to be pushing on the momentum. You want to graph, do you have momentum? So you can miss 2 days, but if you do 3 days, you actually have an upward momentum. So my hope is what I'm trying to do is with my everyday check-in with myself that I religiously fill out, I'm trying to graph that how much, like, did I 50% do breathing in January? That's amazing. That's really great from coming from
Yeah.
zero. But if I only looked at the days I don't, it's really hard. So I think it differs for everyone, but intentionally journaling for 20 minutes, breathing for 6 minutes. There's this whole theory, and at Microsoft, they made us do this for high performance,
Yeah.
high performer achievers, and there was this whole course. but they talked about how 6 minutes of deep breathing a day can actually change your brain chemistry. So if you
Mm.
can just put 6 minutes on your clock and do really deep breathing, that might actually help you level set. And then lastly, I realized I don't love exercising in a gym, but I love swimming.
Mm.
So how do I inculcate exercise? And it ended up being religious with my swimming. So now I
Yeah.
swim, and a lot of us, especially emotional types, might relate to that because water is a flow and you are completely submerged. So your like ears, your senses are completely kind of isolated. And that's a really good moment to ground yourself, come back, have those thoughts, but just be in motion and learn to flow. So these
Yeah.
things have been really helping.
No, thank you so much for sharing that. It's interesting, you know, knowing you so well and so closely, and yet there are things I'm learning about you on a podcast that I haven't probably had the opportunity to learn, just in a personal lives. So that's powerful. It's also vulnerable. And I think one thing I heard very strongly from you is behind the words that you said was really like perspective is powerful. Like
Hmm.
seeing the effort and tracking the progress you're making versus being getting caught up with things that are not happening. And I think that's been a huge unlock for you, even when it comes to your emotional modulation, in addition to
Definitely.
these tactical things. That also brings me to like this next piece around just transitioning from big tech to the corporate big tech world into the startup world. It's a significant move, and
Hmm.
it's a significant move from primarily because of how you function. The environments are different. So what are some key differences that you have experienced between these two environments?
I mean, the biggest thing anyone will say is processes. The
Mm,
processes
yeah.
get basically flattened out because you have three people working versus 50, 60, legal team, all these sort of barriers that make it much harder to move faster. So at Microsoft, for example, there were, I think, 8 months where we were just waiting for some legalities to work out. So
Mm,
my team couldn't work. And 8 months is a long time. In 8 months, we've moved Tern from being an editor to growing our waitlist to having thousands of users, less than 8 months. So if that brings in perspective, you can understand big tech is really great if you want to build your skills. Specifically, you have a niche, like maybe you love deep learning, maybe you want to be the best product manager that exists out there,
yeah.
right? Big tech is really good to get trained in that. But when it comes to wanting more, like a lot of people in big tech don't. I knew someone who didn't even know what SaaS meant, which is
Mm,
shocking. Like you're in tech, but you don't know the definition of SaaS. So it does almost shelter you with your golden handcuffs, and you get food catered to you, and you have massage chairs. So you get used to a lifestyle. So I think the biggest thing is when I joined Microsoft, I had an intention that I want to ensure I don't adapt to a lifestyle that'll be really hard to come off of. And I think that was one of the biggest intentional pieces that really helped that transition phase
mm.
because I wasn't used to, going in helicopters or spending a lot on Michelin star restaurants. That wasn't my lifestyle to begin with. So that's one. And when we talk about processes, it's really important to, understand what you're adapting to. It's very easy in big tech to know, okay, you have
Mm.
6 months, a project for 6 months, you need to build this whole thing. You're going to chop that into monthly goals, you're going to chop that into bigger epics and then little tasks, right? Now, in a startup world, you can tentatively plan for that. But for example, we released a product on Friday. We had this roadmap for this week, and we got so much feedback that that roadmap
Yeah.
switched. So you need to be a lot more agile and adaptable, and your team needs to be in a mindset that it's okay to adapt.
Yeah. So if you had to, in a nutshell, give me the difference between what does agility mean in a corporate setup versus what does agility mean in a small firm?
In corporate, what I noticed was agility meant taking feedback from the team and ensuring the
Hmm.
team's processes are working right. So, for
Yeah.
example, if bugs were not, let's take from a technical perspective, right? Like if bugs were not resolved at a certain time by one developer and that developer didn't communicate with someone else and now we pushed all this code for the Friday review.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, something doesn't work and we didn't know. Now that goes into feedback on that Friday, and that gets implemented on Monday that, hey, we need you all to put a comment on that and make a ticket for anything that's left, right?
Yeah.
So those are the processes I saw often within big tech. Within startup, the agility comes in business strategy more than the
Mm.
technical aspect,
Yes.
because
Mm.
you don't have actually the room to build out testing suites and have all these different platforms working in a very foundational sense. You're moving fast and trying to prove this is something you should refine. And that's where your goal is really from a business perspective to prove the business and then build foundationally really well versus build
Yeah.
the best software ever that no one might use.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. And those were some very strong, I think, differences because we touch upon so much around what agility means, as individuals. And also, I think the definition changes based on the environments you're in. And that's what I'm hearing
Mhm.
from you when it comes to the kind of, we do need agility, I think, as a very foundational skill to be successful. But that probably changes based on context and environment. And of course, I
Definitely.
think also the degree of agility you need is very different when you're functioning in a high growth, ambiguous environment like that. When you're in the startup landscape altogether. Um, you mentioned about also, the team having agility. So when you're building a successful startup, and I think you would agree, your team is extremely critical and key to that
Hmm.
success. Um, what's your take on building team for a startup? Because I know you have first actually. How big a team do you have? I know it's a very small one. You're fairly young,
Yeah.
but you still have one, which is commendable, I think. Um, yeah, and what's that been like?
Yeah, we're a very small team. So I have a full-time full stack engineer. We have a part-time data scientist with over 10 years of experience. There's me, and then we had a little gap in our partnerships business sense. So we have a very a really great ex-Airbnb leader who's our advisor who helps in that space.
Hmm.
So when you're building your team, I think it's really important to very clearly identify what the gaps are. So the gaps can't
Yeah.
be as loose as I need someone for business. It needs to be more pointed that I need someone who's built partnerships in a certain way. And then you go look for those experts. So that's the first step of building any team. But in today's world specifically, I think there's a shift that's happening. In pre-pandemic, one of the biggest things, like it was an asset for small teams to have in-house designers, in-house developers. It
Yeah.
was extremely commendable to have everyone in-house, so that if something needed to change, your team can manage it and you're not relying on anyone. But as we all know, the economy has been shit and everyone's struggling. So because of that, funding's really, gotten diluted. People aren't getting millions of dollars for an idea anymore. People have to prove and have revenue, and
Yeah.
pre-seed stage has become seed, seed has become Series A. Now, in that context, most people are moving in towards offshore talent along with
Hmm.
AI as it's getting better.
Yeah.
And in that space, I think it's worth noting, I think I was telling you earlier, but Chamat Palapatia, I can never say his name, but he was a senior executive at Facebook between, I
Yeah.
think, 2007 to 2011. He's on the All In podcast. He's a really well-known investor. A lot of the SPACs go through
Yeah.
him. And he's actually incubating companies, he says, and he calls us 80/90. And the thought
Mm.
is, he's like, I will tell me a SaaS product, I will build 80% of the features at 90% discount using
Mm.
AI and offshore talent. And that's something really important to note because he's one of the leaders in these spaces. Like his,
Yeah.
opinion matters a lot. And I don't think AI is as sophisticated yet, but slow and steady. Just yesterday, I was at a voice and AI conference, a lot of YC companies and, daily companies. And you can find a lot of products that do what you want to do along with offshore talent, which can
Mm.
be good building blocks initially. But now there are limitations with that as well. So
Yeah.
you can build all of that initially to maybe prove out your concept. But then the limitations come in, if you want to get, let's say, petabytes of data and only small amounts of data enabled within this certain model that you're using, you now need a team that specializes in
Yeah.
actually building those large architectures. So just to go into a little bit of an example, with Tern, we just used GPT
Hmm.
and we got all these itineraries built, mapped, so much data. But now we started hitting limitations with GPT because it doesn't let us give it rich enough context to have higher resolution itineraries. So now our next step is, okay, we need to now in-house build, and now we're moving towards finding someone more in-house. Um,
Hmm.
but yeah, those are some things to just understand about the product, and it's really about how you strategize getting to that point today. And the last thing I'll say is when you're looking at your teammates and looking at I would highly look at people who are at the forefront, so who are paying attention to Dev Day of OpenAI.
Yeah.
Like on 26th, a new GPT came out. Are they playing with it? Are they messing around with it? Are they building little projects on the weekend? Because everything's now weekend project buildable, so you can assess that.
Yeah.
So I would recommend, if you're a big enough company looking for this talent, do a hackathon. These techies love hackathons. We AI folks love hackathons. Do a hackathon for Gen AI, and you will probably find your talent there.
That's a great segue into my next question, which was going to be around, there is building teams for a startup, which needs a certain skill set. But then there is also building teams for in this new AI realm, which is like evolving at an incredibly fast pace. Things are changing. It is
Mm-hmm.
so important to remain updated, with both your skills and your knowledge. And what I'm hearing is that's really the key to finding the right talent, that is diving into, are they passionate about it, looking at
Mm-hmm.
what are they building, what are they doing in their spare time to truly be interested and invested in this. But Tavi, another question here would be, there's clearly a difference between how you hire for tech talent when you are, say, a head of HR at Microsoft versus Tavishi hiring for Tern.
Yeah.
What do you think are some of the key highlights there?
So I think so. I've not personally hired at Microsoft, but I helped with recruiting. So I've looked at
Yeah.
hundreds of resumes when we were sifting out. And the biggest thing that we would look for wasn't necessarily like GPA is really important to know someone's
Mhm.
learnability. So that's something you can use if someone's at like 3.4 to 3.7, you know that they can adapt and learn. That's a good signal.
Mm.
Then the second signal you look for in a resume is really, are they doing side projects? If everything is just school based, that means they're not actually thinking out of the box or
Mm.
trying out things on their own. So that's actually the second thing we would look for. And then the third would be any metrics associated. So, of course, if you're looking at senior engineers, they're not going to have side projects. They're going to have almost entrepreneurial projects within their
Mm.
previous company. What do those projects look like, and what did they accomplish within that business frame? So I think it also depends what you're looking for in that state. But yes, yeah, at Turn, we look for more of a Swiss Army knife than a specialist at all
I
points.
like that. Yeah, I like that. And I think that's the skill that changes. That's the skill set you need when you're in a startup space versus, when you're hiring for big tech. That's the
Right.
specialization versus the Swiss Army knife, essentially.
And it's also
Yeah.
about like engaging with the risk
Mm.
tolerance too,
Yeah.
because small, medium, large, your risk tolerance change so much. So large companies are at higher risk of getting someone on board who might just be there for money and not passion,
Yeah.
but small companies might be at risk of hiring someone who doesn't have the risk tolerance and is actually
Mm.
going to become a burden. So that's an important, I guess, more EQ slash, less technical aspect to look out for.
I think that's a very great point. And this, my background, I've largely worked with startups. I've kind of thrived in the startup and small business world.
Hmm.
And I think one thing that I've seen is a big unlock for people who work in these small environments has actually been agility and the risk tolerance.
Yep.
Because I think with that risk tolerance comes a little bit of a comfort with also the ambiguity, which is like in spades when you're with a small organization.
Hmm.
So absolutely with you on that. And last question, Tavi, you have a full stack developer, right? You
Yeah.
mentioned that. Um, And with the constantly changing landscape, what's your time and energy investment in making sure that your developer is completely upskilled the right way,
Hmm.
is remaining current with what's happening in the industry? So as a small business founder, what's your investment in that space?
That's a great question, and I guess I should have mentioned this. So when you're looking at my developer is offshore,
Yeah.
but I
Okay.
was able to go down the offshore path because I know how to break down and I know tech. So I
Mm,
think that's
mm.
a key difference. Like, offshore is good, but just getting an offshore team that handles everything when you don't know tech is going to be a lot harder to achieve the outcomes you want.
Yeah.
So you definitely want someone in-house who understands that. So on that front, I have like a Notion document called upskilling. Every developer that comes on just goes through that. I give them about 3 to 4 days. In large companies, that can look like 10 days, 20 days. You're just upskilling. You want to make sure within 3 days that engineer knows what stack they're working with.
Hmm.
And the best way to get them started is for them to fix bugs. Bugs are the best
Hmm.
way for them to get acclimated to any sort of system, right? Now, on top of that, when new tech is coming around, I make sure once they're upskilled, I keep sending them links and I keep asking them, okay, what do you think of this? Can we use this a certain way? So just keep the conversation going and keep that, the juices flowing basically with
Absolutely.
this new
Yeah.
thing's coming. What do you think? Can we do a little proof of concept or can we play with it? Just have a discussion around it, even if you don't use it. But that's been the biggest thing. And then my time commitment is high because when you look at a project, and as I mentioned, you have month long, you have week long, you have epics, you break those epics down, and then there are subtasks. You want to really bring in offshore talent at the point where you have the little, like post epics, when you have the small
Yeah.
chunks out,
Hmm.
not during the epic time, because you want to give them extremely executable, actionable, time bound activities. And that's the best way you're going to make the most of your money, their time. You know, they do their
Yeah.
best work as well and move the fastest.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I think what I heard from everything you shared was, and I know this is very easy to let go of, especially when you're a small business, when you're multiple areas of focus, is to continue
Hmm.
being focused and invested in your people and in your talent, because they're really your resource. And what I've heard is communicating what's needed, providing them the tools and resources to really do the work that's needed by the business, and providing opportunities for application on the job. And I know this is something we reinforce whenever we're doing any kind of upskilling and training here at Thoughtium as well. So it's really nice to hear that's something you're doing as a small business owner and leader as well. So kudos to you for that. And you know I this was, despite the fact we have a lot of conversations, this was a very interesting conversation for me personally. And like I said, interestingly, I got to learn few new things about you that I don't know why I didn't know about. So that was amazing. We do close out all our conversations with a lightning round. I have a couple of questions for you, and I just like the first thing that pops in your head when you hear the question.
Okay, sounds good.
Ready for it? All
I'm
right.
ready.
First question, because I know what a big tech nerd you are. What's the latest piece of tech you're geeking out about?
R1 Rabbit. I actually just pre-ordered it. It's the biggest thing coming up is wearable devices now.
Yeah.
And you have Humane Pin, which you've heard of, there's Tab. R1 Rabbit is like one of the competitors, but seems the strongest with the newest form of action models.
Interesting. I hope I get to see it when I'm visiting you.
You'll get to use it.
Great. What are you currently watching, reading, or listening to?
Well, I started reading Elon Musk's book, the
Mhm.
biography, but I haven't gotten far. Um, but yeah, I've not been watching anything specific. It's just been kind of fun stuff. Like I watched Griselda recently, which is about Griselda Blanco, the
Yeah.
uh, cocaine lady lord.
Yeah. Yeah. That'd be interesting. Um, because you've been such an active and avid traveler and literally have a company in that space, what's been your favorite travel destination so far? I think I know this, but
I think
for
you
the
know this
audience.
too, but I think there are two. One is recent, one is old. So
Yeah,
Jammu Kashmir, I mean, we went years ago.
in India.
That's always been, yeah, in India, it's been one of my most memorable places because it's literally like heaven on land, right? You have
Yeah.
all these terrains, all these climates, great food. So that's very memorable. And then recently we went to a Colombian Caribbean island called San Andres. It's a hidden gem. Please don't book too many tickets there, but it's more local Colombians who go, travel to their Caribbean island. And it's beautiful, small, quaint. You can go diving and in clear waters, swim with fish. I don't know. It's heaven.
And that's also where you got engaged, right?
Yes,
Recently.
yes. So
That's
extra
amazing.
memorable.
Extra memorable. That's amazing. Last question. Think about something you admire about yourself and fill in the blank. If the world were more like me, it would be more blank.
Definitely resilient.
I agree. Yeah.
Very resilient. I think it
Abs-
takes a lot to break me down. Well, you can break me down. You think you're breaking me down, but it actually takes a lot more than the first
Yeah.
layer of breakdown.
I think it's very difficult to have you leave a path you have chosen. And I think I've known that about you since we were kids. It was something I used to find extremely inspiring, just the resilience and the resolve and the determination you had with everything you did, be it wanting to go for a sleepover or, started studying the degree that you wanted or the startup. So, I mean, that's a spirit I truly admire about you.
Appreciate that. Appreciate that. Yeah, I like to stand my ground, but I think we're also the people who need to make the very needed change in this space. And
Absolutely.
more women seeing us women, building, and my entire team is women too, accidentally, but I'm really happy about
Mm.
it. So I think it's really important for this message and this sort of team to be showcased, and people to see you can do that.
100%. Well, Tavi, it's been a pleasure hosting you today and having this conversation with you. Thank you so much. And I really enjoyed that perspective on, what it means to build a team and invest time and energy, especially as a young founder, and even more, especially in this very fast paced and evolving AI world. So thanks a lot for your perspective and input.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And I'll definitely be tuning in like everyone else here every Thursday.
Well, thanks, Tavi.
Oh,
Uh, well, we want to thank everyone else who joined us today and tuned into the episode today. A reminder, you can watch all our Navigating Now episodes on thoughtium.com/live. I am Eshani Gupta signing off, and I wish you all a beautiful